Black CEO faces racist insult from white tycoon at gala. Her epic response wipes out $5.9B. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The invitation arrived without ceremony, which in itself was a signal. It came through a private channel Avery Cole rarely used. Neither the glossy embossed envelopes meant to flatter, nor the massaged emails written by aides who believed proximity to power was a substitute for understanding it. This one was concise, precise, stripped of ornament. A state banquet, restricted attendance, strategic partners only. No press, no panels, no speeches, just dinner, conversation, and the quiet reinforcement of alliances that preferred to remain unnamed. Avery read it once, then again, not because the words required interpretation, but because the absence of excess did. Invitations like this were never about hospitality. They were audits. They were tests disguised as courtesies, opportunities for those who believed themselves untouchable to observe who was seated where, who spoke freely, and who was expected to listen. Avery understood that better than most. She had spent years building structures that governments relied on but rarely acknowledged publicly. Financial backstops, infrastructure guarantees, contingency frameworks that stabilized projects when politics became volatile. Her firm, North Meridian Group, did not court attention. It did not sponsor conferences or place executives on magazine covers. Its influence lived in margins and footnotes, in the quiet relief of officials when numbers aligned, and projects didn't collapse under public scrutiny. Avery had learned early that visibility was a liability. Power, real power, functioned best when it was mistaken for inevitability rather than choice. She set the invitation down on her desk and looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office. The city stretched below, indifferent and efficient, a grid of movement and light that did not care who sat at which table. She preferred it that way. The banquet was not necessary for her work to continue, but the timing mattered. Several state-backed projects were approaching inflection points, energy corridors under political pressure, infrastructure timelines straining under public opposition. The numbers still held, but only if confidence remained intact. Confidence, Avery knew, was not built in public statements. It was built in rooms like the one described in the invitation. Rooms where people revealed themselves when they thought the stakes were social rather than structural. Her assistant, Mara, stood quietly near the door, tablet in hand. "They've confirmed the guest list," she said, careful not to inflect the sentence with opinion. "Small. Very curated." Avery nodded. "Who's hosting?" Mara hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Officially, the state. Unofficially," she glanced down at the screen. "The power broker." Avery didn't need the name. There were only a few people for whom that description applied so completely that no clarification was necessary. Women and men who had spent decades learning how to dominate rooms without appearing to try, who believed access was synonymous with authority, who mistook tradition for legitimacy. They were effective until they weren't. And when they failed loudly, dragging systems with them because they had never considered the possibility that those systems could function without their permission. "I'll attend," Avery said after a moment. Mara looked up, surprised. "You're sure?" "Yes." Avery's tone was even. "It's time." The preparation was minimal. Avery didn't consult stylists or rehearse talking points. She didn't need to. Her decisions were made long before she entered rooms like this. The banquet was not a negotiation. It was an observation. She chose a gown that communicated exactly what she intended: elegant, restrained, impossible to dismiss as accidental. No excess, no performance, just presence. She arrived alone, without entourage, without visible security. People often mistook that for vulnerability. They rarely made the mistake twice. The building itself was designed to impress through permanence. Marble steps worn smooth by decades of carefully choreographed authority. Flags arranged with obsessive symmetry. Security discreet but unmistakable. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and old agreements. Avery moved through the entrance hall without pause, her name checked against a list that mattered far less than the assumptions being made about her by the people already seated inside. She felt them before she saw them, the familiar density of expectation, the quiet recalibration that occurred when someone new entered a closed system. Eyes flicked toward her, then away. Calculations began. She was shown to her seat without commentary. Not at the head of the table. Not at the margins either. A placement that suggested inclusion without influence, visibility without authority. Avery noted it without reaction. Seating charts were statements. This one revealed more about its authors than its subject. The power broker was already there, radiant in the way people became radiant when they believed the room belonged to them. She laughed easily, loudly, drawing attention with practiced effortlessness. People leaned toward her instinctively, eager to be seen in proximity. She did not look at Avery when she arrived. Not immediately. That, too, was a choice. As the first course was served, conversation flowed along predictable channels. Muted policy references, careful jokes, shared nostalgia for victories that had required no personal risk. Avery listened more than she spoke. She always did. Listening revealed hierarchies faster than declarations. It showed who interrupted whom, whose comments were absorbed and whose were politely ignored. She cataloged it all, not with resentment, but with clarity. This was the system she was being asked to underwrite. This was how it behaved when it believed itself unobserved. The insult came later, not as an explosion, but as a casual cruelty, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been corrected. "She's a disgrace," the power broker said, laughing as if sharing an inside joke with the room itself. The words landed and lingered, sharp enough to still the clink of silverware. Avery felt the shift immediately, not in herself, but in the space around her. Silence, thick and telling. No one challenged the remark. No one redirected the conversation. At a table like this, silence was endorsement. Avery did not move. She did not need to. Her stillness was not submission. It was data. She watched the reactions unfold. The men who laughed too loudly, the ones who smiled thinly, the ones who looked away and congratulated themselves on neutrality. She noted the senator who pretended discomfort while enjoying the spectacle, the delegate who suddenly became fascinated by his plate. She memorized faces. Allies, cowards, opportunists. The taxonomy was familiar. The power broker, emboldened by the lack of resistance, gestured toward Avery with theatrical casualness. "Honestly," she said, her voice sweet with contempt, "some people mistake invitations for acceptance." Laughter followed, louder this time, reinforced by relief. It was easier to laugh than to intervene. Avery's eyes lifted briefly, not in anger or defense, but in assessment. She scanned the table slowly, deliberately. This was the final review. The system had revealed itself without prompting. When she reached for her napkin and placed it beside her plate, the movement was subtle enough to go unnoticed by most. But a man 2 seats down, trained by years of crisis management to recognize inflection points, paused mid-sip. He had felt this before, the moment when something irreversible began without announcement. The power broker mistook the quiet for victory. "Relax," she said, smirking. "It's practically a compliment. It takes nerve to sit at a table like this." Avery met her gaze for the first time. Her eyes were steady, unimpressed. She said nothing. That unsettled the room more than any retort could have. A waiter hesitated behind her chair. The orchestra softened its tempo, sensing a shift it hadn't rehearsed. Somewhere, a phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. Leaning forward, the power broker lowered her voice just enough to feign discretion while ensuring everyone heard. "People like you should be grateful," she said. "These seats are earned." Avery inhaled slowly. She reached into her clutch and removed her phone. The gesture was quiet, controlled, but it changed the temperature of the room. A few guests exchanged glances. A minister frowned, watching more closely now. The power broker laughed again, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said. "Who are you calling?" "Your assistant." "Yes," Avery said softly into the phone. "It's me." She listened, eyes still on the table. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried no emotion. "Pull everything," she said. "Effective immediately. Every deal connected to tonight." She ended the call and placed the phone gently beside her plate. For a moment, nothing happened. Reality in rooms like this rarely announced itself. It seeped in. Crystal glasses hovered midair. Cutlery tapped porcelain. The laughter faltered, not stopped, but fractured. For several minutes after Avery Cole set her phone down, the banquet continued as if nothing had happened. That was how rooms like this protected themselves, by pretending continuity could outpace consequence. Glasses were raised. Plates were cleared. The orchestra, sensing uncertainty but trained to obey momentum, filled the silence with restrained strings. Laughter resurfaced in cautious spurts, thinner now, as though testing whether the moment had truly passed. The power broker leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She mistook the pause for submission. "Honestly," she said, rolling her wrist as if dismissing a minor inconvenience, "some people don't understand protocol." A few guests nodded reflexively. Agreement was easier than resistance. It required no recalculation. Across the table, Avery remained still. Her expression was neutral, her posture unchanged. She did not look at her phone. She did not look at the power broker. She watched the room instead, the way an engineer watches stress lines form before a structure gives way. She had already made her decision. What followed now was simply process. 2 seats down. A senior advisor to the Treasury adjusted his cuff and glanced at his phone again. The message he'd received moments earlier hadn't changed, but its meaning had begun to settle. Contingencies frozen. Effective immediately. No qualifiers. No appeals process. He didn't look up. Looking up would require acknowledging what his instincts were already telling him. The far end of the table. A foreign minister leaned toward his aide and whispered, "Wasn't her firm involved in the infrastructure guarantees?" The aide hesitated. "Indirectly," he said. "Why?" The minister didn't answer. He was already checking his screen again, scrolling back through documents he had skimmed months earlier, footnotes he had never expected to matter in a room like this. The power broker continued, buoyed by the residual laughter. "You see, decorum matters," she said, addressing the table as if delivering a lesson. "Some people mistake proximity for belonging." A ripple of approval moved through her circle, not because they agreed, but because agreement was habit. Across the table, Avery's gaze lifted briefly, meeting the power broker's eyes. There was no challenge in it, just assessment, the kind reserved for variables that had not been accounted for. The look lingered a fraction of a second too long. A senator cleared his throat. Another guest shifted in their chair. The laughter finally died, leaving behind an awkward vacuum that no one rushed to fill. "This is a state banquet," someone offered weakly, attempting to restore balance. "Let's keep things civil." The power broker waved the comment away. "Of course," she said lightly. "I'm simply saying what everyone's thinking." No one confirmed that. In fact, several people were thinking something else entirely now. Phones buzzed again, this time more audibly. A man from the finance ministry frowned at his screen, then excused himself, murmuring about an urgent call. A donor leaned toward his wife, whispering with a tightness that hadn't been there moments earlier. "What's happening?" she asked. "I don't know," he replied. "But I don't like the timing." Avery reached for her water glass and took a measured sip. Her hands were steady. The only movement was the slow, deliberate way she crossed one leg over the other, unhurried, comfortable. That detail did not go unnoticed by the people who understood leverage. The power broker leaned forward, irritation creeping into her voice. "Are we done with the theatrics?" she asked. "Some of us have real work to do tomorrow." The word work hung in the air, heavy with irony. Those who understood what had just been set in motion knew this wasn't theater. It was procedure. Across the table, a policy advisor whispered, "If that call was real, This could get complicated.
Coordination, bravery, and mutual trust. Each participant understood the extreme risks involved, yet there was no hesitation. The clarity of purpose, combined with the moral imperative to act, created a unity of intent that transcended fear. Mark Bingham's physical presence and strength provided reassurance to those preparing for the confrontation. Jeremy Glick's strategic thinking and calm demeanor reinforced confidence in the plan's feasibility. Tom Burnett and Todd Beamer's leadership ensured coordination and focus. Other passengers contributed in myriad ways, offering encouragement, assisting with logistics, and maintaining morale. The cohesion of the group became a force multiplier, enabling them to act as a singular, determined unit. The impending confrontation was not only a physical challenge, but also a moral one. The passengers had to confront the reality of potentially sacrificing their lives to prevent mass destruction on the ground. This conscious engagement with mortality is a testament to the extraordinary human capacity for courage, empathy, and moral clarity. The passengers' actions highlight a fundamental truth. Heroism is defined not by the absence of fear, but by the deliberate choice to act rightly in the face of danger. As the plane neared its final approach over the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, the tension within the cabin reached its peak. The hijackers, unaware of the passengers' plans, continued to assert control through threats and intimidation. Yet the passengers' resolve remained unshaken. Their strategy, honed through careful planning and mutual trust, prepared them for the decisive moment that was about to unfold.
Stabilized projects already straining under political pressure. Deals that only worked if one person stayed on board. Avery. What no one at the table had bothered to confirm was simple. She wasn't a participant. She was the board. The power broker had negotiated for months without ever meeting her. Everything had been filtered through attorneys, intermediaries, secure channels. Avery preferred it that way. It allowed her to observe behavior before committing capital, to watch how people treated those they believed were unimportant. This banquet had been her final review, and the room had failed. 2 seats down, the Treasury advisor's phone buzzed again. His face drained of color as he read the update. "They've frozen the contingencies," he whispered to no one in particular. "All of them." Across the table, a foreign delegate stiffened. "That's not procedural," he said quietly. "No," came the reply. "That's withdrawal." Withdrawal meant more than money. It meant credibility evaporating, timelines collapsing, allies calling emergency meetings before dawn. Avery sat through it all without expression. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't look at the people whispering her name now with growing urgency. Her work was already in motion. The power broker, still clinging to control, misunderstood what was happening. "This is absurd," she said sharply. "No one person can disrupt arrangements at this level." Several people looked at her then, startled not by the claim, but by how much it revealed. Avery finally spoke, not to defend herself, not to clarify, but to correct the assumption. "People don't disrupt systems," she said evenly. "They withdraw from them." Silence followed, complete, the kind that recalibrated rooms. The power broker stared, trying to reconcile the woman she had mocked with the gravity settling around the table. "And who exactly do you think you are?" she demanded. Avery met her gaze, unblinking. "I'm the reason this table exists," she replied. There was no anger in her voice. Buzzed again, more insistently now. A senior official stood abruptly, excusing himself with a tight nod. Another guest pushed back their chair, murmuring apologies no one accepted. The realization spread unevenly, like a slow leak turning into a flood. They hadn't insulted a guest. They had insulted the keystone. Avery rose, smoothing the front of her dress with a simple, practiced gesture. The movement was unhurried. "I won't keep you," she said calmly. "You have calls to return." She turned and began to walk. Behind her, the power broker sat frozen, the laughter from earlier echoing faintly in her memory, now stripped of its protection. The state banquet had not lost a guest. It had lost its foundation. The doors of the banquet hall closed behind Avery Cole with a muted finality, thick wood ceiling in the confusion she left behind. The corridor beyond was quiet, insulated from spectacle by design. Sound softened here. Voices became echoes. Authority, once amplified by chandeliers and crowds, thinned into something more honest. Avery walked without haste. Her heels struck marble in a steady rhythm, neither quick nor defiant. People often mistook urgency for importance. She never had. Urgency belonged to those reacting. She had already acted. Her phone vibrated once in her clutch. Not a call, not an alert, just a confirmation. One word. Avery glanced at it briefly, then slid the phone back out of sight. The movement was reflexive, almost ceremonial. The work was done. Everything that followed would unfold without her intervention, exactly as designed. Across the city, systems began to disengage. In a secured office 3 floors underground. A legal director closed a file she had prepared months earlier and hoped she would never need. The document had no dramatic language, no emotional framing. It didn't accuse. It didn't threaten. It simply invoked clauses that had always existed, waiting for conditions to be met. "Proceed," she said into a secure line. That single word traveled through encrypted channels, activating protocols designed for moments no one publicly acknowledged but everyone privately planned for. A private bank. A relationship manager stared at his screen as a familiar line item changed status. Pending became withdrawn. No explanation followed. None was required. He swallowed hard and reached for the phone, already calculating which conversations could be delayed and which could not. A government-linked fund. A compliance officer flagged a sequence of guarantees and initiated an automatic review. The process was clinical, procedural, impossible to argue with. Not hostile. Not accusatory. Just definitive. The $5.9 billion didn't collapse. IT disengaged. Back inside the banquet hall, the shift finally found its voice. A man near the center of the table stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against marble. "Excuse me," he said to no one in particular, phone already pressed to his ear. His expression tightened with every step away from the table. Another guest frowned at her screen. "That can't be right," she murmured, refreshing. The message didn't change. The power broker felt the air thicken before she understood why. She straightened in her chair, irritation flaring. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Why is everyone checking their phones?" No one answered immediately. A senior official leaned toward his colleague and spoke in a whisper that carried just enough. "The contingencies are frozen." "Frozen?" came the reply. "How?" "Withdrawn," the official said. "All of them." The power broker laughed sharply. "That's impossible," she said. "You don't freeze arrangements at this level without months of notice." A pause. "Unless," someone said quietly. The notice was given privately. Across the table, a diplomat's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, stiffened, and stood without explanation. A donor followed moments later, muttering about a conflict that fooled no one. The orchestra faltered, then stopped entirely. Musicians exchanged uncertain looks, bows hovering midair. No one had told them to stop. They simply understood that the moment no longer supported music. "This is a misunderstanding," the power broker insisted, rising to her feet. "Someone call Treasury. Call the bank. Fix this." Her father, seated beside her, didn't move. He was staring at his phone, reading the same line again and again as if repetition might change its meaning. "Strategic partner withdrawal confirmed," he read quietly. "Effective immediately." He looked up at his daughter slowly. "They're gone." Her smile froze. "Gone where?" "Out," he replied. "Completely." The word landed like a dropped glass, sharp and unmistakable. Around them, the banquet unraveled without ceremony. Plates barely touched were cleared away. A coordinator whispered urgently into a headset. The flags lining the walls stood motionless, witnesses to a night slipping off script. "Get her back," the power broker said, her voice low and urgent now. "Find Avery Cole." No one moved, because everyone in the room understood what she refused to accept. There was nothing left to negotiate. Negotiation required leverage. Leverage had already been reclaimed. Outside, Avery paused near a tall window overlooking the city. Lights stretched out in clean lines, indifferent to titles and tradition. Traffic moved. Buildings hummed. Systems continued exactly as they always did, unimpressed by ceremony. Her phone vibrated again. All positions closed. No residual exposure. Avery exhaled once, quietly. Not relief. Completion. Back in the banquet hall, the power broker remained standing, watching as people avoided her eyes, as calls went unanswered, as the machinery she had taken for granted stopped responding. The banquet had not been interrupted. It had been rendered irrelevant, and the room, finally aware of it, began to empty. The realization did not arrive with noise. It arrived with absence. The absence of laughter. The absence of movement. The absence of certainty. Avery turned away from the window and continued down the corridor, her silhouette steady against the muted light. Behind her, power was still trying to speak. But no one was listening anymore. The room did not empty all at once. That would have looked like protest, and no one wanted to be seen protesting power while it was still deciding where to settle next. Instead, the departures came in increments. Small, deliberate movements that carried more meaning than spectacle ever could. A chair scraped softly. A jacket was lifted from the back of another. A phone was checked one final time before being slipped into a pocket. Unanswered calls accumulating like silent verdicts. Each motion recalibrated the space, loosening the invisible threads that had once tethered everyone to the power broker's orbit. She felt it before she fully understood it. Authority had always responded to her presence. Rooms leaned toward her. Conversations adjusted their volume and direction instinctively, as if guided by gravity. Now the gravity was gone. Attention no longer curved in her direction. It drifted elsewhere or collapsed inward, private and defensive. "What's happening?" she asked. Again, more sharply this time, and no one answered. A senior advisor stood near the edge of the table. Phone pressed to his ear, nodding with tight precision. He murmured acknowledgments, yes, understood, effective immediately, phrases that carried weight but no comfort. When he hung up, he didn't return to his seat. He moved toward the exit without looking back. Another guest followed. Then another. The power broker's father remained seated, shoulders heavy, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the tablecloth. He had stopped pretending this was temporary. Numbers did not lie, and the numbers were already cascading through systems that did not wait for permission. "This is overreaction," the power broker said, forcing a laugh that landed flat. "They'll come back once tempers cool." Her father looked up slowly. "They don't come back," he said. "Not when the exit is this clean." She shook her head. "You're exaggerating." "No," he replied quietly. "You are." Across the table, a policy advisor leaned toward a foreign delegate. "She wasn't bluffing," he whispered. The delegate nodded grimly. "She never does." The power broker heard the whispers now, felt the way they threaded through the room without including her. The conversation had shifted from with her to about her, and then past her entirely. That transition was subtle but devastating. It marked the exact moment she stopped being central. "What are they saying?" she demanded, and no one answered directly. Saying it out loud would make it permanent. A staff coordinator approached cautiously, posture deferential but distant. "We're going to conclude the evening earlier than planned," she said. The power broker stared at her. "On whose authority?" The coordinator hesitated, then answered with a word that landed harder than any insult earlier that night. "The boards." "Boards. Plural." The orchestra packed their instruments in silence. The flags lining the walls suddenly felt ornamental, symbols stripped of the authority they once suggested. The hall designed to impress now felt exposed, like a stage after the audience had left. The power broker sank back into her chair, phone clutched tightly in her hand. She refreshed, scrolled, searched for something, anything, that contradicted the reality settling around her. There was nothing. Messages went unanswered. Calls rang out into silence. The machinery that once moved at her request no longer acknowledged her inputs. This wasn't resistance. It was exclusion. Across the city, Avery Cole was already gone from the building, stepping into the quiet efficiency of night traffic. In the back of a car, she sat alone, city lights streaking past the window. She did not check her phone. She did not need updates. The collapse was procedural now, unfolding exactly as designed. Back at the banquet, the last threads of choreography unraveled. A senator smoothed his jacket and stood. "I have a call I need to take," he said. Already turning away, a donor slipped out through a side door, coat draped over his arm. A foreign delegate muttered apologies that no one returned. The power broker watched each departure register as a loss. Not emotional, but structural. Each person leaving was a recalculation, a decision made without consulting her. Her father rose at last, phone pressed to his ear. He listened, nodded once, then ended the call without speaking. "They're distancing themselves," he said. "From what?" she asked. He met her gaze, expression grave. "From you." The words landed without cruelty. They didn't need it. A television screen meant for ceremonial footage flickered briefly to a news channel before someone noticed. A headline scrolled quietly beneath a talking head. $5.9 billion in public-private deals abruptly withdrawn. The screen was turned off too late. The damage was already done. Guests avoided the power broker's table now as if proximity alone carried risk. The same people who had laughed earlier refused to meet her eyes. Reputation was contagious. So was collapse. "This is temporary," she insisted, more to herself than anyone else. "They'll fix this." No one contradicted her. No one reassured her either. Outside, footage from the banquet began circulating. Cropped clips, silent moments, her laughter stripped of context. The narrative assembled itself without asking permission. Privilege exposed. Power misread. Consequences activated. Inside the hall, staff cleared untouched plates and folded linens with professional efficiency. The room emptied not in outrage, but in calculation. When the last guests filtered out, the chandeliers dimmed slightly, as if acknowledging the shift. The power broker stood alone at the table she once commanded. For the first time in her career, the room did not respond. It simply waited for her to leave.